Yo, what's up everyone? Welcome to this video where we learn about object-oriented programming in Python, also known as OOP. So let's dive right in. What in the world is OOP? So OOP, in full, object-oriented programming is a programming paradigm based on the concepts of objects, which can contain data and code that manipulates data. So OOP aims to implement real-world entities like inheritance, encapsulation, polymorphism, abstraction, and more in programming. And the main focus is on objects rather than the functions or procedures. In this video, we'll make OOP simple, and I hope you understand everything that we teach. So stay tuned. Before we even start writing code, let us first learn the concepts in OOP. So OOP, there are four main concepts that you have to understand. The first concept is a class. So a class is just a blueprint for creating objects. That's the simple definition of a class. And an object is just an instance of a class. Then a class can have attributes and methods. And the attributes of a class are the variables that belong to that class. And the methods are functions that belong to an object or a class, or methods are just tasks that an object of that class can do. So basically those are the four main concepts in OOP, and don't worry if you didn't get anything. We'll just see the examples and you'll see how to create a class and how to define attribute methods and how to instantiate objects. To instantiate is just to create objects. OOP is important because Python itself is an OOP language. It has many methods that are defined and we have used them before. So let us learn how to create our own classes and method. And to create a class is just simple. You just write the class keyword, then write the name of your class. Let me just say my class like that. And classes will start with the capital letter, that is convention. You should start a class with the capital letter. The rest doesn't matter, but it must start with the capital letter. Then inside here I can just write anything. Let me just create a variable x and give it the value 5. So that can be a very simple class that I can create there. And these variables in a class are called attributes. And to create an object of this class, I can just create, let me just say a variable like, let's say obj1. That will be my object. Then I can create it using this class. I'll just say my class like that. So here I'll have created an object obj1, and now this obj1 has these attributes. To prove that, I can just print obj1. Then to access an attribute use the dot syntax. So I'll just say dot then x. So use this syntax dot to access attributes of that object. So I'll say obj1 dot x. And if I save this code and run, I expect to see in the terminal the value 5. And indeed I got 5. So what the heck did I just do? So here I defined a simple class called my class. And this is the syntax. You just write the keyword class. Then you put the name of your class there. In this case, my class. Then you put a full colon. Then inside the class, you can have attributes and method. In this class, I only had one attribute called x. And I gave that x the value of 5. We just said attributes are just variables inside a class. Just that simple. So inside this class, if you create a variable, that's an attribute. So inside this class, I had this variable x, but I'll just call it attribute because that's the correct term, x, and give it the value 5. Then to create an object, we said that an object is an instance of a class. We said that here an object is an instance of a class. So to create an object, you have to create it using this class. In short, an object is of type class. So I'll create this object here, object1. Then I'll call this my class. Then invoke it to create this object. Then this object will be created and it will be of type class. And if I try to print that, if I try to access this, since this object belongs to this class, it has access to all attributes and methods inside that class. And I've told you to access attributes and methods inside a class, use this dot syntax. That's why I said object1 dot, then I have an attribute named x, then I dot x. And if I print that, you have seen I got the value 5 because inside here in the class the value of x is 5. And this is a very important concept. We'll use this greatly in Python. To show you that this object is of type class, I can just check its type using the type function that we learned. So I'll just say type, then I can pass there my object obj1. And if I print this, you'll see that this object is of type my class. So in short, an object is of type class. This is an important concept to learn. You can see it will say it is of type class, which is the class is my main dot class. That's the type of this object. So that's a very important concept to get. And this was just a simple class, just to start with the basics. So now let us learn additional things that you can have in classes. What we had here was cool. Nah, I'm just lying. This was not, this didn't mean anything, because if I just get another object, let's say object 2 and 3, all of them will just have the same x, and the value of its x will be 5, and that's not a good thing. You want, maybe if someone creates an object, its value of x should have a different value, so that you can know this one is different from the other one. Or let me just come up with a class that at least makes sense. Let me just create a class. In this case, I'll create a class of book, which I'll be storing all my books there. And we know that a book has a title, number of pages, and all those things. But I don't want to go to the detail. Just create one attribute of the title, just the title. And that's why I want to introduce this function called the init, or the initializer. Don't worry, I'll just explain it simply. So just write def. It's just the same syntax how you create another a function, and you just call this function called init, also known as the initializer. And I don't know it out of field, but let me just type it so that you can see it. So you just write def, then init, then you put parentheses because it's a function, then you put full colon, just the same syntax of a function. So this init is a special function, but we have said that a method is just a function in a class. So if it's in a class, it's called a method, not a function, but it's just a function inside a class. Okay. So this is a method called init, and this init method is a very special method that is usually called once you create an object. If you're coming from other languages, it's you can relate it to the constructor. Yeah, and in this init you have to put here self. These are the placeholders. You put self and maybe the attribute that you want. Let's say book has a title. I'll just put title. Don't worry, I'll just explain everything. Then if you want a book to have a title, I can say self dot title is equals to title. So this self is that instance of that object. In other languages they say this dot something. In Python it's self dot, the attribute is title, and you want when someone creates an object, they'll create it with the title, and that title will be passed here, and that object will have that title there. So let us just see it in practice. If I want to create a new book, I'll just say, let me say book 1 is equals to, you call the book, you call the class name. But now, since you have this initializer and it requires us to pass a title, when creating this book I'll have to pass a title here. So maybe I can just pass this title. There's a book that I read called Hello Tom. I read this book when I was young, so you can just search for it. Yeah, so I read this book. So I've created this book called Hello Tom, and this is an object. So this one is called object initialization. So now if I want to get the value of book 1, I can just say book 1 dot title, and if I print this, I'll get Hello Tom. If I run this code, I'll get there Hello Tom, and we got there Hello Tom. So let me just explain this one more time. I'll just start from the class. So a class, we have said a class is just a blueprint. So a class defines something, but it's not the exact thing. It's just the definition of a thing. Just like when you want to create a house, you have first to have a plan, then create the actual house. So a class is just like a definition of something. Then this class, many objects can be got from that same class. For example, I can have more than one book. I'll just call it book 2, book 3. And I'm not a good reader, so I don't know many titles, so I'll just create some random titles here. Let me just call this, I don't know, let's say title 2, this one title 3, So here each book will have the attribute title, because you have seen earlier that this book is of type book. Just like the way we had integer types, we had strings, now we have our own type that we created using the class. Because we saw that we cannot, OOP tries to represent the real world, and in programming you always have the int types, the boolean, and in real world you have some other types that cannot be represented by the inbuilt types. That's why you have to create our own types, and here I've created my type called book, and I can define what that book can have, like a title and anything else. Those are called the attributes. And also a book can have methods, but we'll come to methods later. But there's this inbuilt method here called init, and this method is always called when you create an object. And in this case I've created this object, object1, and if I create this book, this will be called, and it will set the title of this book to Hello Tom. And that is how OOP works. When calling this method, we didn't pass here the self, because we have said that this self refers to that instance of the class, in case that object. That's why we're not passing self. And also this can have as many attributes as you want. For example, I can add another attribute here, let's say pages, that keep tracks of the number of pages that this book has. And I'll just say the same syntax, but let's say self dot pages, then I'll say is equals to pages. But now if I have to create an object, I'll have to pass title and pages. Now I'll not only pass title, but I'll also add the number of pages. In this case, let's say this Hello Tom, it was just, I think it was just 24 pages, I'm not sure. Let me just remove this, we'll return that in a while. So now I can pass the title and pages. So you can have any number of attributes that you have, is just allowed. Also we can have methods inside our class. For example, I can just create a simple method here. I'll create a method to check if the book is long or not. So I'll just create a method. So a method is just a function. So I'll just create how I created the function. I'll just call it is long. But here you have to put the keyword self. So for every method you create, you have to put this keyword self. Okay. Then this method will take self and also the number of pages. Then it will check if the number of pages is more than 100, that book is long, else it's not long. So I'll say if the number of pages, and to track the number of pages you have to say self to mean the, for each individual book, that instance of that class self dot pages. If that one is greater than 100, I believe that book is long, because I don't know, I'm not a reader. So if that book is greater than 100, we say return let's say return true. If it's too long, we'll return true. If it's otherwise, return false. Other than to return false, or you can just put an else, but this is just fine. So if the book has more than 100 pages, that book is long. So if you call is long, it will be true. Else it will be false. So now when I'm creating this book 1 has access to this is long function, and we have said that to call a method, use the dot syntax. To access any method or attribute, use the dot syntax. So I can say book1 dot is long, and if I invoke that, it should give me, since the pages are 24, it should be false. I forgot to put, for you to call this is long, you have to pass the number of pages here. So I'll pass 1, because here I have access to the book1 dot pages, like that. So, and if I run this code, you'll see now I'll get false, because book 1 is not long. And that is how you deal with the attributes and method. And even if I have another book, let me just create another book. I'll just create another book. I'll call it book 2, and let's say this title is just, let me just call it test, and let's say test has 100 pages. You can see now all these books have access to the same method, because all of them are of the same type. And that is the advantage of having object oriented programming. So now if I call this book 2 instead of book 1, I call here book 2 and also here book 2. So this book 2 has access to this is long method, And if I call it and I pass the number of pages of book 2, since book 2 has 100, or let me say 150 pages, so that it can be greater than. So since book 2 has more than 100 pages, this statement will be true and the value of is long will be true. So if I run this code, you'll see that book 2 is long. You see it will return true. So basically that's the introduction of this object oriented. So the first thing that you have to know is how to create a class. Use the class keyword, then the name of your class, and it should have a first letter should be capital, the rest you don't care. Then you put a semicolon. Then a class, it's not a must, but it's important for you to have this init function, which will be used to instantiate the object. And inside here you can define your attributes, and you can just do them like this to give them the values of that instance of the class. Then you can have your own custom object inside the class. Then the other method that the class can have, this one called the str. So let's learn about that before we end the video. Currently, if you print this object, let me just try to print this object 2 here. So if I print object 2, it will come there in the terminal and see how that will appear. So you can see it will tell me main book object at. So it will tell me the type of that object, it is of type book, and the memory address. So maybe if you want to make your object to be human readable and even more appealing, you can use this str function. It's advisable to use it, especially if you are building application for end users. So end users will see a more presentable string. So you can just say def to create that str, we put underscore, then you say str, then underscore. Let me just delete this so that I can type it myself. Then it's a method, so I'll put that. Then we'll say that all methods, they must have this self here, so I'll just put that self. Then inside with this method you can just return how you want the object to be seen. So maybe I can just say and to return, let me use the f strings here, and to return maybe the book title. So I'll just say something like self dot title, because you said to access the object inside the class, use this self. So I'll say self dot title, then maybe I can put a space, then maybe self dot pages. It should be brief, not detailed, just a brief. And now if I print this book, you can see now it will just tell me the title and the number of pages. You can see it will tell me that the title is test, number of pages just 150. And that is because every time I try to print this book, it will call this str function, and this str returns the name of that title and the number of pages. You can just define it anyhow that you want, but I found this one interesting and I found that important to tell you. I believe by now we know how to access attributes of an object using a dot syntax and how to access methods using the dot syntax. Also, maybe I can tell you how to modify. Once you have created this object, let me just take this object 1, let me just remove this object 2. Let's say I've already created object 1 called book 1. It has number of pages 24. You have said that to access that, you can just say the name of the object book 1 dot the attribute, that is pages. And if I print this, I'll get the value 24. You can just confirm that I'll get the value 24 in the terminal. That is it. So to modify, you just assign it a new value, say books.pages, then you say now and this to be page 50 pages. And now if I try to print the same books.pages for book 1, so say book 1.pages, now that new value will be 50. So that is how you modify values of attributes in Canva. Now it's 50. So that is how you modify the values. And to delete this, you can just use the del keyword, the way you saw before. To delete an object, you can say del. So first, to delete an attribute, you can use the del, like you can say just del, then like that. That way you'll have deleted the attribute. And if I try to say book 1.pages, it will be an, let's see what it will just bring. I try to print this one and run this code. You can say it says book has no attribute called pages, because you have already deleted that attribute here using this del keyword. Just like there you saw how to use del to delete attributes, that's the same way you use it here. And also to delete the entire object, you can just say del book 1, and that way you'll have deleted the whole object. And if I run this code, you'll see there's no object called book 1. You can see book 1 is not defined because I deleted the book 1. So that is it with the OOP. You have to know about the classes, the attributes, the methods, and the object. So that is it with this video. See you in the next video. We'll learn about the inheritance. So peace out.